paying close attention to his words. And then responding to Christ in prayer and worship, especially in regard to what we've been listening to from our reading or our hearing of the Bible. So here's action A along these lines for today in regard to Jesus being worthy of our first love. Action A is to develop and maintain a habit of personal time with Christ. And what would be very helpful for us is to collectively agree this is sort of a matter of first business. To be a person who loves Christ first, I need to be a person who's actually connected to Christ. And a way to maintain that connection is to develop and maintain a habit of spending time personally with Christ. Now, I think it's helpful, and so this has been incorporated into this new way of looking at the life. It's helpful to think in terms of developing a personal time with Christ by deciding upon a time and a place and a plan. That's the formula. You need a time so that it actually happens. You need a place so that you're not, at the time running around trying to figure out, where did I leave my Bible last? And you need a plan so that you're not just kind of flipping through the Bible to a favorite passage and reading it for the umpteenth time this year. Time and place and plan. And the idea here is with this kind of thinking, if someone came to you and said, I would like to, love Christ more authentically, can you recommend something I could do? We're suggesting that the first thing you say is, let's work on you developing and then learning to keep in place a regular habit of reading in a meaningful way with Christ. And that person will say, right, how do I do it? And you can say, well, let's talk about it. You need a time and a place and a plan. And the most helpful thing you can do at that point is to tell them about yours. So I have a time and a place and plan, and if you ask me, I can tell you about it, but I want to warn you, as you're putting together a time and a place, you want to be very careful. The time is important, but the place is as well. When I first caught on to this idea of developing and maintaining this kind of habit, I was a university student. This is a University of Guelph story. The Western students will excuse that, but I was at University of Guelph. Sorry, I couldn't help it happen. And I was living in residence, and I decided I'd come to the place in my experience with Christ that I wanted this to be a reality. So I needed a place. Now, I was sort of wanting to become an early morning person, which was a real stretch for me back in those days. So I picked as my time very early in the morning. And then I immediately had a problem because I shared a residence room with a guy that didn't have the same sort of convictions and wouldn't appreciate me turning the light on and having my time with Christ and Bible pages rustling and all that sort of stuff. I actually tried in my part of the closet in the residence room, and that was kind of claustrophobic, so I needed to move on from there. So, excuse me, so I came up with, I'll choke up thinking about this. Yes. I found this hallway in the residence room, just sort of going upstairs to the next floor. And in the stairwell behind the hallway, there was this kind of little place. It was very private, and I thought early in the morning this would be perfect. So I took my Bible and the other things that were part of my plan, and I went up there, and I really liked it. So I developed the habit of going upstairs, the back stairway of the residence room, and sort of crouching up in a little corner up against this concrete wall in its residence, and having my time with God. It was really ideal, or at least I thought it was. That was my place, and I thought it was. But one morning, because I was now up on the sixth floor hit the fifth floor, and the fifth floor was a women's floor, there was a young university student who was on her way to the gym or something like that, went through the doors of the stairwell and saw me there, crouching up against the wall in a sort of weird little configuration, and I had my Bible with me. And I said, oh, excuse me, sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I clearly did startle her to be in the stairwell. But I didn't think anything of it at all until later that week, when I heard the rumors floating around the residence that there's this creepy kind of perverted guy who was skulking in the hallways early in the morning with a little book of poetry. And I felt responsible for the rumors, so I had to go up to the residence room and introduce myself to these girls. Say, I'm the creepy little pervert, but it's not book of poetry, it's a Bible. And that didn't make it any better at first, but I explained that I was, actually sort of an innocent sort and had no harm in mind. And anyway, it was a bad place to pick, and that was way back then. But all these years later, I had a better place. There's a particular chair in one particular room in my house. It's right beside a bookshelf where I can put my Bible and other pieces of equipment that I use as part of my plan. And the only people who ever see me there are my daughter and my wife, and they see me in that room, and if they're up early in the morning, and they don't think it's creepy at all. So that's good. Well, I'm a big fan of having a time, and I'm a big fan of that time being early in the morning, because to me it seemed to act out what we're trying to get here. We're trying to get this idea of first love. We're trying to be people who love Christ first. And there's something appropriate about starting a day with time with him. And then you need a place for the reasons stated, and then you need a plan, and I could share with you mine. But I have recently, so I'll leave you to ask me about that if you're interested. But the point would be that you can help someone else establish this kind of habit if you have a plan, a time and place, and are willing to share it with someone as an example to them. But what I want you to think about just now as we're imagining this becoming perhaps a new reality or an upgraded reality in the weeks ahead is that to do this properly will take time and energy. And time and energy just doesn't float around. It always has to be taken from somewhere else. But I want to assure you that it would be worth the sacrifice, whatever has to be sacrificed in order to take time and energy for something else and to give it to this. I think it's sort of what Paul the Apostle was speaking about when he wrote to the Philippians and said, whatever gain I had, I counted as loss for the sake of Christ. Indeed, he says, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. The time and energy involved in developing and maintaining this kind of habit, the time and energy that you would have to count as loss in some other column, is, according to the Apostle Paul, no less an authority than the Apostle Paul, more than worth it. And what makes it worth it is the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus, the Lord. And you could say, knowing him better, as you will, if you develop this habit of spending time with him. We don't just need a time, place, and plan. We need a sense, we need an understanding of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ better, of being people who have figured out how to fit into their busy lives a habit of listening to him as he speaks through his word, and a pattern of responding to him, praying to him, especially in regard to what you've been listening to him say, and worshiping him for what he gave. If it comes to evaluating our time with God, we can do what we thought to do. Oh, well, look at that. Thank you. Would you just stand here and hold this for me? Because that would be great too. Thank you. Thank you. We could talk about our own evaluation of our time with God, like we could talk about our own evaluation of the church. But part of my plan each morning is to read from a book by Charles Spurgeon called Morning and Evening. It's morning and evening readings. And I thought rather than giving you any sense of how you could evaluate your own time with God, well, I saw this morning. It's September 12th. And it encourages us to think about the evaluation of our regular habit of time with Christ that Christ himself would give. What he might say in a letter he would write to us about our time with Christ. This is Charles Spurgeon on September 12th, speaking of the verse in the Old Testament about the jealousy of God. Spurgeon says on this topic, your Lord is very jealous of your love. Did he choose you? He can't bear that you should choose another. Did he buy you with his own blood? He can't endure that you should think that you are then your own, or that you belong to this world. He loved you with such a love that he would not stay in heaven without you, but would sooner die on earth than let you perish. And he can't endure that anything should stand between your heart's love and himself. In the same reading later on, Spurgeon says, he's also very jealous of your company. There should be no one with whom we converse so much as with Jesus. To abide in him only, this is true love. But to commune with the world, to find sufficient comfort in our worldly comforts, to prefer even the society of other Christians rather than secret fellowship with him, this is grievous to our jealous Lord. He wants us to abide in him. He desires us to enjoy constant fellowship with him, so that many of the trials which he sends us are specifically sent for the purpose of weaning our hearts from the creation, and so fixing them more closely upon himself. Spurgeon says, let this jealousy, which would keep us near to Christ, be a comfort to us. For if he loves us this much, so much as to care thus about our love for him, we may be sure that he will suffer nothing to will protect us from all our enemies. This is Spurgeon. Something worth reading as you start your time with Christ. And something to remind us that more than what we think of our time with him, what he thinks of our time with him is really the point. So that's the first note and the first piece of living the life. We call it living the life of Christ. But I'd like to set it in the context of what's going on just now. So action number B is to develop and maintain a habit of corporate time with Christ, which is to say that our individual relationship with Christ is meant to be set in a context, and the context is being part of a church, like, for example, this one. We ought to be familiar with this because we have recently taken the time to go through Peter's first letter. Under the title of Holy Hopes, we studied 1 Peter for the last few months, and in chapter 2, he speaks about how coming to Christ is always tied to becoming part of a church when he says, as you come to him, a living stone rejected by men, but in the sight of God chosen and precious, you yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Which is to say there ought to be a large group aspect, there ought to be a corporate aspect to your time with Christ. And that requires a time and place and plan as well. So I have a suggestion. Time and place and plan? Just a suggestion. How about West London Alliance Church? Sundays, 11 o'clock, or 9 o'clock, or both if you're especially keen or perhaps a slow learner. This is an opportunity for us to be together as a whole community, like-minded people who are seeking to love Christ with the first love, and there's an intended benefit from pursuing that goal collectively or corporately. So I'd encourage you to set your time with Christ as a reality in your individual life in the context of time with Christ experienced as a group. And speaking of groups, a third action to add to the list is to consider, and maybe you should specifically and seriously consider, getting some personal help with this. For some of you know to be people who spend time with Christ, but you've not been able to land on a plan that works, and maybe some personal help would help. Now, we've heard this morning already in the announcements, and there's a person stationed at the kiosk who's more than happy to give you details about small group life and ministry here at West London. And this is an excellent time of year to be thinking about getting some personal help with the pursuit of this goal of living the life with Christ. You've already heard of a number of opportunities. Some are gender-specific, some are age-specific. Small groups of people who will be able to welcome you in and serve you as examples and perhaps be inspired by your example of how to be a person who lives his life with Christ. But maybe action C, consider getting some personal help with this, needs to be even more personal than small group life affords. So I think small groups should be a reality. So what I would like you to think about as well under action C is the idea of getting help from an individual. Someone who perhaps has more experience in putting together a personal time with Christ, who has an example and would be willing to spend some time and energy coaching you on how to go about becoming more the person you need to be. One word used to describe that sort of person is the word mentor. And I'm embarrassed to admit that only this week I learned where the term mentor comes from. So if you already know this, good for you. You're way smarter than I am.